Joining me now is New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who sits on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, let me start first by having you react to that news out of Washington yesterday that Paul Manafort, longtime campaign manager for Donald Trump, decided to plead guilty with Bob Mueller.
Well, this is another week in the life and times of a reality show host in the White House masquerading as President of the United States. And what it essentially has meant for the American people is nothing but chaos, crisis, confusion, and a growing culture of corruption. And the guilty plea by the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is just consistent with the guilty plea from the deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, the guilty plea from the former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, the guilty plea from Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, the guilty plea from Papadopoulos, a former foreign policy advisor during the Trump campaign. At a certain point, I think reasonable people are going to connect the dots that there was something very wrong that took place in the Trump campaign, possibly collusion and conspiracy with Russian spies to interfere with our democracy, sell it out, and artificially place somebody at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Ultimately, Bob Mueller will put that together in terms of the facts and the law, and hopefully it will be made public to the American people.
Congressman Jeffries, if you were at the Green Market and Grand Army Plaza this morning, looking at the Brussels sprouts, the tomatoes, the apples, everything that's in season, you're talking to constituents of yours there, what's the appetite, do you think, for impeachment? There's this big debate within the Democratic Party of how much should impeachment be talked about here on the campaign trails. We're 2 months away from the midterm elections. Where do you fall on that issue?
Well, House Democrats are going to continue to focus on our For the People agenda because the American people, folks at home in the Brooklyn communities and Queens communities that I represent, and others all across the United States, do want to see us fight for lower health care costs, to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, to dramatically reduce the price of life-saving prescription drugs, fight to increase pay for everyday Americans through a real infrastructure plan to make sure that people have the opportunity to provide a comfortable living for their families. And they do want us to clean up corruption in Washington so that their government works for them. Now, Bob Mueller is a special prosecutor. We fought for his appointment by the Department of Justice. We fought for Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. We were successful in those two efforts. And so I think a lot of folks back at home and across the country want to see that legal process play itself out and then let the chips fall where they may.
Ask about this storm brewing around Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He faces that confirmation vote from the Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday of this week. There was a memo that the senator from California, Senator Dianne Feinstein, tendered to law enforcement officials. The FBI has now made that a part of Judge Kavanaugh's files. I should just read here from a statement that Judge Kavanaugh released. I categorically and unequivocally deny the allegation. I did not do this back in high school or at any time. This centers on an alleged sexual assault, in that memo being alleged by somebody whose name we don't know, whose identity we don't know. Again, this was tendered by the senior senator from California. What difference does this make? How have you reacted to this turn here in the confirmation proceedings for this nominee to be on the Supreme Court?
Well, these are very troubling allegations, and this is just consistent with a growing cloud of illegitimacy that surrounds this particular nomination. First of all, it's not even clear to me that when you have a president whose campaign, whose close associates are under intense criminal investigation, that now is the appropriate time to be able to make an appointment that will affect the lives of the American people, not just for months or years, but for decades in the context of the Kavanaugh nomination. These allegations also illustrate the problem with the rushed hearings. They are trying to jam this nomination down the throats of the American people in advance of the American people having opportunity to weigh in the context of the midterm elections. That's quite unfortunate and shows the rank hypocrisy of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, because he robbed Barack Obama of a legitimate Supreme Court nomination by refusing to even meet with Merrick Garland in 2016. We should press the pause button on this nomination. There should be no vote on Thursday. We should fully investigate these very troubling allegations and then allow the American people to be presented with the facts, because if that, in fact, turns out to be the case, Obviously, this is not an individual that should be headed toward the United States Supreme Court.
I want to ask you lastly just about the government's response to the storm that's ongoing in North and South Carolina. The president signing a disaster declaration today for the state of North Carolina. There's that element of the response. There is the Twitter response to what we've seen as well. The president writing a great deal about Puerto Rico and what happened there, citing a study that he's discrediting himself here from the George Washington University involving how many individuals lost their lives during Hurricane Maria. I just want to get your response to what you've seen, both the official through that disaster declaration and the unofficial, what we've seen on the Twitter page as well.
Well, we continue to stand with the people of the Carolinas and other individuals throughout the South who have been impacted or may continue to be impacted by Hurricane Florence. And we're thankful for the first responders and for those individuals who are doing all that they can to save lives and to make sure that people see themselves out of harm's way. Now, that's a very different dynamic than what we've seen coming out of the White House from a president who is just concerned about himself. House Democrats, we're going to fight for the people. This is somebody in the White House who everything is about spin and misdirection and trying to create a narrative, as was the case with what he talked about in terms of Hurricane Maria, that he's the greatest person since sliced bread. The American people can see through the nonsense. That's why we're seeing continued disapproval ratings that are falling out of the sky. And I think at the end of the day, people will see through the subterfuge that Donald Trump continues to project out to the American people.
All right, the gentleman from Brooklyn, Hakeem Jeffries, thank you very much for this.